Boatworks Today is a viewer-supported show. To learn more on how you can get involved and watch extended ad-free versions of these videos, please visit our website, boatworkstoday.com, and click on the top of the heading where it says Support This Show. Thank you. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you're doing well. My name is Andy with Boatworks Today, and this week we're going to be closing up a couple of old scupper holes as preparation for being able to continue building out the landing area of this cockpit. And more specifically, I'm talking about these two holes right here. You can see them on the left and the right of your screen. Now, I've already done a layout video kind of going over what it is that I'm trying to do up in here. If you haven't seen that, I'll put a link right up here in the pop-up window as well as down below in the description. But real briefly, essentially what I'm looking to do is I want to take this area of the deck and extend it out to about this far and then have it come down so that this will then become somewhat of a smaller, landing area. And then by doing this, it's going to give both on the port and the starboard side, it's going to give a little bit larger of a landing area when you're hopping down from the helm or whatever kind of seat or bench I end up putting up in here. And by doing this, it's essentially going to turn these into, small self-contained storage lockers. Now, by doing that, I do still need to have some drain areas, for areas for water to get in here for it to actually get out. But I don't necessarily want the water from inside these lockers to be draining down into this area because I want this storage compartment to be essentially dry. So that's the reason for these two holes. They got to go, and I'll figure out the drainage situation a little bit further down the road, kicking the can, so to speak. Now, because these holes are not structural in any way and they're not below the water line, I'm going to be doing these a little bit differently than what I've shown in the past. So now, if these holes were actually through holes where they went through the hull, below the water line, the way that I would have to repair that would have to be, addressing that patch from both sides, both the interior and the exterior. So from the top, it would have to be ground down to a taper, and then as well as ground down up from a taper from the bottom side. Now, because this is neither one of those situations, it's not below the water line and it's certainly not structural, I'm going to be able to do all of this from the top side. Now, this is a question that I get quite a bit, over the years, and it's, people are looking at a situation and they're like, well, I've got to patch this hole, but I don't have access to the underside or to the back side of it for, being able to build it up on both sides. And that does occasionally happen. And generally what I suggest is to, rather than doing like a 12-to-1 taper, which is a standard, taper. So for every inch of thickness, you have to basically run your taper that you grind out roughly 12 inches. So 12 inches in diameter for 1 inch of thickness. So generally what I recommend in areas where you're not able to get to the back side of a particular, location is sometimes it's hard to double that 12-to-1, but make it larger. So look at doing something closer to, like, say, a 16-to-1. That way you're spreading out that patch over a much larger area. So, but this one should be pretty straightforward. The thickness on here is about 1/2 inch, so I'm going to be running about as much as I can, close to like a 5 or 6 inch diameter patch for these holes. Well, this is a bit interesting. There's actually some balsa coring in here. This is the first place that I've actually found any type of a coring material. So up to this point, everything has just been solid glass. So, well, I guess I've got a couple of choices here. I guess I was expecting this to be solid glass. Now, if I wanted to, I could come in and kind of clean up the inside of the edges around here and then try and insert another piece of balsa, just try and fill this up a little bit. But I don't think I'm going to. And the main reason is that I don't have to. Again, this is not any kind of a structural thing. Now, if this were, again, a hole going through the hull, well then, yes. Obviously, then, that was something that would need to be done. But since this flies, but since this is I'm just trying to make this hole go away, nothing, there would be no benefit to actually filling in that hole. I'm just going to glass right over top of that.
Now, if you look here, I've got, well, right over the whole area, I'm going to have a little bit less than 1/4 inch of actual build once the new glass is in place. And I think that is going to be more than sufficient. And then it gradually tapers off as you get closer to the outside of this taper that we put in.
So what I think I'm going to do is I've got a bunch of these little scrap leftover pieces of 1708. I think I'm just going to basically lay one on top of the other. I'm going to go 3 layers thick, possibly 4. And I'm not even going to bother, having each one different size, because I've got good access for sanding it all down. But I think I'm just going to laminate initially 3 of these together using some 2-to-1 epoxy, and then stick it in place and let it cure. And then I'll be able to come in tomorrow and basically sand off any of the excess. So by doing that, that'll naturally give me my tapering of the glass. These are such small pieces. If I were to actually cut, say, like a 2-inch diameter, 2.5, and then a 3-inch diameter, I suspect the 1708 would start to unravel and just become a little bit more difficult to work with. So I'm going to leave all 3 pieces. These are roughly 3 by 4 inch, give or take. I'm just going to laminate all 3 together and stick them in place and let the epoxy do its thing. And now, we wait. So now, something I want to point out just real quick before I get this fairing put down is actually how much fairing is going to be going down. And it's not much. Basically from here out is basically already flush and level. It's just this little spot right in here that's a little bit low, and it's only low by maybe, I don't know, maybe like a 1/16 of an inch, give or take. And as you get back towards the radius it's perfectly flush again. So it's just a tiny, tiny little bit. And something else I thought was kind of cool to, you can just kind of point it out, see if you find it interesting, is that if you remember, we laid down a total of 4 layers in each patch. And each layer was not tapered, they were all the same size. But yet, as this was all sanded down and ground down flush to the surrounding deck here, it naturally created kind of its own little taper. So here's a line for 1 layer, here's 2nd layer, the 3rd layer, which kind of wraps around here, and unfortunately I can't find the 4th layer, but it's in there, I promise. So for the fairing, I'm going to be going with my old friend, little Mr. Total Fair. And now I'm not going to need much, no, not much at all here, so I'm going to do, I don't know, maybe tops about maybe like a 1 ounce, and I'm going to mix a little bit more. And just to refresh, this stuff gets mixed 2 or basically 1 to 1. And going back to your grade school days, when you mix yellow and blue, Bueller. You get green, of course you get green. That looks good to me. Good consistent color and no streaking. I think we're ready to do this. Now I'm going to intentionally leave this a little bit thick, just because I want to have extra for sanding, or extra room for sanding. And this is a little bit of a tricky spot to get here because of the radius, but I think we're going to get her. Good, and I will see you tomorrow. So good morning. It has been about 16 hours since we laid up the fairing compound made by Totalboat, and it should be all set up and ready to get knocked down. Now for doing this, I'm going to be using a regular DA sander, specifically the RO or the Rotex 150 by Festool, and I'm not going to be using the grinder just because fairing compound by its nature is supposed to be easy to sand. So if I were to use something as aggressive as, say, like the grinder, that would just be way overkill, and it'd end up actually creating more work for myself than, you know, if I had just taken maybe 1 or 2 more minutes longer and done a little bit more carefully with an actual random orbit sander. Now when I'm doing this, I'm going to need to be a little bit careful here, because when I'm sanding, I don't want to run this sander too close or too tight up into this edge here, because then it'll just end up kind of sanding a little bit of a groove in here. So when I'm using the sander, I'm only going to be using it on the flat faces. So I'll take it, you know, not much farther, you know, into the radius than I am right here. But I'll use this for the flat face on here, as well as for the flat face on here. And then for inside the radius, I'm going to be using, it's just a little sanding jig that I made a few years ago. It's not quite the right radius, but it will be close enough. And what that's going to allow me to do is just to, you know, carefully come in here. It's going to maintain this radius in through here, but most importantly, it's going to maintain a nice straight plane from this extending all the way out. There isn't going to be any kind of a weird little hump right where, you know, where I started doing the glasswork yesterday. So that part will all be done by hand, which, you know, luckily these are small areas. So let me get everything set up and see how this goes. Well, surprisingly, that turned out very well, much better than expected. I never get the fairing done on one round. It usually takes me 2, sometimes 3, but luckily this all sanded down in one coat, one and done kind of a thing. I like it when that happens. So this is the starboard side. Now, as you can see, nice and flat all the way across. Perfect, perfect, and perfect. Now, to be honest, when you're doing fairing like this, I mean, yes, you can use a stick and you can, you know, try and make it as scientific or, you know, as you want. But the reality is, when you're doing the fairing, the best tool that you've got at your disposal is your hands. I mean, basically, when you're going over the surface, if it feels good, then it is good. I mean, it's a little bit different story when you start getting into the actual finishing where you're prepping for paint and something like that. But as far as doing the rough finishing and the rough fairing, your hands are your best tool for making sure that the contour feels right and that everything just feels like the way that it's supposed to. So, you know, you don't need to overcomplicate this. You don't need to make it more difficult than what it is. Really just, you know, use a little bit of common sense and So with these 2 scupper holes closed up, that is the last step that needed to be done before we can actually start breaking into the Coosa and building out the landing area for this cockpit. So keep an eye out for that. That's what's going to be coming up for next weekend. So as always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and that little notification bell. I'd truly love to have you on board. If you have any questions, comments, you can leave those down below. And as always, thanks for your time and thanks for watching.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.